Well, welcome back again this week. They say you shouldn't speak ill of the dead, so I won't. I'll just tell the truth. How's that? We see a great deal of world and U.S. press, media, extolling the virtues of Nelson Mandela. As you know, myself and our magazine have been for many years telling people that, wait a minute, Mandela is a communist terrorist. But we see the Financial Times extolling his virtues. We see it in all sorts of things like the Madiba Magic, which was one of his names. Here's USA Today. You've got the Wall Street Journal extolling the virtues of Mandela. Chicago Tribune, the front page of the New York Times. But it's interesting that yesterday's Times, Sunday, for December, I got it upside down, for December the 8th, it says, Nelson Mandela, communist. But not to worry, because it was necessary for him to be a communist, and after all, communism is dead. Let me read you the last paragraph of this fiction. In the end, of course, the greatest favor communism performed for Mandela and the ANC, that's the African National Congress, was collapsing. Once the Soviet bloc had disintegrated and China had gone capitalist, it's not communist China anymore, I guess, the last white rulers of South Africa could no longer pose as necessary allies on the right side of the Cold War. They knew the game was up. You see, that was part of the plan. To collapse communism, go very subdued toward the communist goals without killing millions and millions and millions of people like they did in the first and middle part of the 20th century. To lull the American public back to sleep, because the American public was anti-communist, they feared communism, they wanted to fight communism, they wanted to stop it. So they killed it themselves, and then presented a new facade. We're no longer communists, now we're good capitalists. Oh yeah, we're a little socialist here or there, don't look at that. They stopped murdering people by the millions. Now they still murder them by the thousands and tens of thousands. All over Africa, as a matter of fact, in these liberation moves, through the terrorist network, which they own, which we've tried to tell people for years. As a matter of fact, these are my notes for my speech that I give on modern terrorism, to let people know what's really going on. As a matter of fact here, this is a shot of the New American Magazine from 1994, telling people about the fact that Mandela is a communist. Here he is with the head of the Communist Party of South Africa, standing under the hammer and sickle, giving the communist salute at their annual get-together. And this has been the case with Nelson Mandela for years and years and years. The South African Communist Party tried to tell people that Mandela was no longer a communist until he died. Now the ANC and the South African Communist Party have announced that yes, not only was Mandela a communist, he was actually a leader in the Communist Party in South Africa on the Central Committee. Keep in mind that we have a man who is a communist terrorist who wrote a paper on how to be a good communist, and part of that was to kill the enemy, to kill innocent people on the way towards establishing communism worldwide. When they arrested him, he had committed over 100 acts of violence. He confessed, he was tried, he was sentenced to 27 years. At somewhere along the line, the international communist movement decided that Nelson Mandela would become president of South Africa, and they were moving in that direction. Now you have the street communist here that Mandela was part of, but you have the elite communist that is never really part of the Communist Party around the world. They pose as industrialists, as media moguls, as politicians, so on and so forth. But they are actually working secretly for the communist movement. They decided that Mandela, at some point, would be president of South Africa. They offered him a deal, to get him out of prison. And he decided against it because the deal was that he renounced violence. Meanwhile, his wife is out there, Winnie Mandela, advocating necklacing people by putting a tire necklace over an individual, soaking it with diesel or kerosene or whatever, setting it afire, and killing people in an excruciating manner over a period of 20 minutes to a half an hour, sometimes longer, by the flames and breathing in the toxic smokes and so on and so forth. Publicly advocating those sorts of things and doing them. And when Nelson Mandela got out, he even sang songs advocating the murder of the enemies. Now, who was the enemy? Did they go out and kill white people? No, they were out killing Africans. They were out killing their own black people. Now, you and I think of black people as all one race, but in Africa they don't. They can't stand this tribe and that tribe and the other tribe. And so there's a lot of problems, just like Muslims have, between Sunnis and Shiites and so on and so forth. They hate each other. And so a lot of this was going on in intertribal rivalry, but also to establish communism. They get rid of anti-communist blacks in the local communities of South Africa through this necklacing program. And that scared the rest of them to acquiesce to this communist movement. And now you see, well, okay, he became president of South Africa and he denationalized, privatized industry. He helped the middle class and all of that business. Well, of course, they do these things in order to get support, foreign aid from the United States, that kind of thing. But don't ever think for a moment that when the communists will get the kind of control they want, that they won't start killing millions again. It's part of their goals. They talk about it all the time amongst themselves. At any rate, continuing on, here, for instance, is out of Investors Daily. It has a cartoon showing Mandela casting a big shadow, but in the, not op-ed, it's actually the editorial in the newspaper, Muslim Brotherhood in White House, ? And it is an editorial by Investors Daily documenting the fact that there are 5 people in the White House under Obama who are working in the security apparatus and deciding national security issues, working in those areas with state secrets, and they're all part of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the parent of Al-Qaeda. Now, question, how can our government profess to be in the middle of a war on terror when they allow parent organizations, members of that parent organization of the terrorists, inside the White House openly working with our national security people? Now, they haven't rejected their ties. They've got these ties and they're in the White House. And you have to ask a question. How in the world can our government be involved in a war on terror and then turn right around and order all the flags of the United States put at half-mast for a communist terrorist leader called Nelson Mandela? It doesn't compute. There's something else going on here. Maybe the war on terror is a little different than people believe. And we see people falling all over themselves to laud Nelson Mandela. We see conservatives, conservative politicians, conservative media people doing it. I'll just read you one. I won't tell you who this is, but just let me read it to you. Nelson Mandela, who passed away yesterday at the age of 95, was an extraordinary man. He led the fight against the odious system of apartheid in South Africa, spent 27 years in prison, and emerged from the ordeal to become the first black leader of his country. Fortunately for South Africa, during his prison years, Mandela ended his flirtation with Marxism. Well, we know that's not true, right? And chose upon his release to be a voice for reconciliation, not revenge. Sadly, however, he retained an affection for some of the world's worst despots. He regularly praised Libya's Gaddafi and Cuba's Castro. Yet after winning the presidency of South Africa, Mandela, unlike other revolutionaries, chose to step down after one term. In 2002, President George W. Bush awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So at any rate, they go on and he continues to extol the virtues of Mandela. Now, I'm not going to tell you who that is, but I'm just going to say this because I've said this over and over again. I've gotten a little flack over it. Never, never, never trust an ex-communist as your leaders. Never. Mandela supposedly had the image of an ex-communist when in fact he never did stop being a leader of the Communist Party. The national and international goals of the communists were far too important for them to stir up problems and allow the world to see a communist at work, so they faked it and built this facade. South Africa is part of BRICS. Brazil, Russia, communist, India, China, and South Africa. They have a bigger plan going, and you can see how they've influenced the entire world by building up one of their own leaders into this icon that people extol the virtues of, and people are holding church services for and everything else. Christians who are doing that when they should be understanding that, wait a minute, these are the enemies of Christians. And when they take over, Christianity wanes and it kills and stifles, even murders Christians. At any rate, that's Mandela, and that's what's going on in our country. It's a sad day to see that kind of support. Till next week, we'll see you then.